G'day, welcome to episode 7 of More Cowbell Please. Today's episode is with John Mays. He is a much loved legend in this business. He is the head of A&R at Centricity. He's the heart and soul. He's been there since the beginning. Now, Centricity signed Lauren Daigle, Jordan Feliz, Katie Nichole, Unspoken, Johnny Diaz, so many great names in our business. And John has cared for them all. So I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with him. Now, it takes a lot to make these episodes, so you'll honor me by hitting the subscribe button, helping grow the channel, and encouraging me to continue on with this. I do believe in it. I think it's a worthy cause. I hope you're learning something and it's helping you in your life. New episodes come out every Thursday and I've got a great list of people lined up. So without any further ado, here we go. This is John Mays.
I love the cowbell.
And you got 5 dings, which is more than anybody else.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Have I just earned those
3.
because I'm the oldest? I've got to be the oldest.
Because you're the nicest guy in the business. That's why. You know,
nice to get you 5.
Well, I've always been impressed with you at a personal level because you care about your people. And I sense that when I've seen you at meetings and things and the way you've interacted with me, I'm like, that guy cares. It's not just an expedient business thing. Well, you know the format. You know what's happening.
Yeah,
You're probably the only person I've had that's actually listened to an episode so far. Because
Ainsley, I've listened to every episode.
That's amazing.
From the first one, and they've all been so good.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
You have a good knack for editing and the production of them. It sounds good. It sounds different. I don't know what you're doing, but I always enjoy listening to it.
I'm using compressors and EQ like audio engineers do.
Yeah.
Now, the video side, that's a whole other thing. I mean, I have not spent any money on cameras or anything. It's just like iPhones and things I already had.
I haven't watched one, and I certainly won't watch this one. But listening to them has been a pleasure, and you just had great people on.
I think there is so much entertainment in story. Like, people would send me something, listen to this podcast. And this one particular one really struck me where he introduced the people, and it was about 10 or 15 minutes in, and I thought, this is going nowhere. And then all of a sudden, they got into the story of their child falling over, going into a coma, being life-flighted. And I lost track of time. And then 20 minutes later, when the story was over, and then they got into these life lessons and things, I moved on.
Yeah.
And I thought, story is so compelling. So that's my inspiration for it.
Isn't it one of the things that's regrettable about Christian music? Like, we've lost story songs.
Yeah.
Country music still has them.
Yeah.
And they're difficult to write. A good story song, to tell a beginning and a middle and an end of a story in 3 minutes.
Oh,
that's
tough.
hard.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's for lack of wanting to try or there's no market for them in Christian music.
Well, that's a challenge. If any artists are listening, story songs, they can be done, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And with great power.
That is true. And it's something that the entire industry has had to adjust to. At the same time, one of the marketing guys was like, hey, look at this. And Jordan Feliz has a song called 180, I think 2 records back, not a single, that is blowing up in Indonesia. Yeah. And now a little bit on the Southeast Asian countries around it. Not English speaking. It's in English, of course. No one can explain why or how. It's nothing we've done. Those kinds of anomalies can happen through streaming that would have never happened in the CD era.
It's true. I mean, I'm looking at like on TikTok where they suggest the music to put on there.
Right.
And, they've got their top songs.
Yeah.
And so one of the editors I work with started adding songs that I've edited that have made it in TikTok streams. And I was just happy to get to 1 billion streams on my credits. And now it's at 10 because I added a couple of songs that were TikTok viral. And
Incredible.
He's like, that's a whole new life. I mean, it's only 30 seconds of the song, so it takes a long time to get the playtime up, but
sure,
amazing.
From a missional standpoint, you think about what is connecting with people emotionally or on a heart level. What's God doing with this song that we could have never done? You got to kind of bow your knee to God's sovereignty and all this stuff that's going on, and I like that.
What a great attitude. I appreciate that. John, I am going to get into it. We're getting into the story. Tell me from the beginning, people that inspired you and like why Christian music, all of that.
Why Christian music, I think the way I was raised, right, in a tiny little Pentecostal church in rural West Texas. And when I say tiny, not 100 people. But at 13 or 14, I kind of became the music kid for this little church. I was able to play different instruments. And while I'm probably still trying to unwind a lot of the doctrine and theology I was raised with, I'm so grateful for the way that little church helped support the probably very sucky music making I was doing at that time, right? So many people, Ainsley, I don't know about you, but so many people I know have that story. There were messy things going on in the church I grew up in. A lot of church hurt probably, but thank God that it provided a place for me to learn how to play music. And, you know, I wasn't a worship leader or anything, but these days you hear that a lot. They gave me a platform to lead. And there was a music camp in Waxahachie, Texas. I grew up in a little town called Andrews. There's an Assembly of God, I think university now, it's called Southwestern there. And they did a little music camp one summer. You could go and get private instruction. And it's an interesting thing now. Like sometimes at work, we'll talk about, you're talking about going on TikTok and they're on Instagram. It's probably more on YouTube than anywhere. Like these 9-year-old monsters, right? How is that kid that good? Especially keys, bass, and drums, and some guitar. These guys are so far beyond. Are there that many prodigies now being born than there used to be? I don't think so. My experience was I reached my own level of proficiency and I wasn't going to get any better till someone showed me something. Now, YouTube, they can go on and get instruction from the best players in the world. And it's creating this generation of, are you kidding me? You're 15 and playing like that already? I think that's something to celebrate, but it's also a little scary.
It is.
But anyway, I had certainly hit that ceiling for myself, and I'm sure it was a very low ceiling. I didn't know this till years later, but my folks couldn't afford to send me to that camp. That little church made up the difference. My mom told me that years later. So thank God for them, because I went to that. I met a couple of guys, you know, just like me. It was the first time I'd ever been like around, ooh, these are my people. They all love music more than anything. And it was the first time I'd heard of like stuff in music stores and different kinds of guitars and basses that they were all playing. It was so fun. But there were a couple of guys there that we were like, all right, when we graduate, we're going to start a band. And they were a year ahead of me in high school. See, I would have been, I guess, 15 or 16 around that time. So I graduated. I called them up. They had already been gigging around a little bit in a little town called Nacogdoches, Texas, which was across the state from me. I'm like, here I come. Let's play. So didn't do any college. Had a couple of years with those guys. If I have a dues paying season of my story, you know, we paid dues in different areas, but that one, in terms of being a musician, was definitely my testing time, right? Because it was hard. We went hungry. We opened for a band out of Nashville at some sort of county fair or something. And that band one night was like, hey, our bass player's leaving. If you want to come audition. It wasn't like we'd love to have you audition. It was just in the way that they did it, you assumed there were lots of guys going to show up for this audition, you know. But I was kind of at the end of my rope. I called my folks that night and I said, hey, I'm just going to pack up. I can say I went to Nashville. I can say I had this professional audition. That'll be fun. And then I'm just going to come on back home, you know. Plus, a little sidebar to this story, that band had the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen in my life singing for them.
Oh, my gosh.
I did not meet her that night. I didn't, of course, speak to her or anything, but I didn't have a real way with the ladies growing up the way I did. But I did think that girl might be at that audition. That'd be worth driving to Nashville, you know. She was not at the audition, but I'll leave a big chunk out here just to say I did get the job, and I married that girl 14 months later.
Wow.
So that is Dianne, who has been my bride now for 47 years.
Amazing. Well done. Congratulations.
Well, yeah, it's a good story just to see how God ended all that together, and I'm very grateful for it. But that's what got me to town. I gigged around with different bands for a while. At some point, realized you're looking at session players going, wow, that's the life. You get to play every day, something different, and you don't have to travel. Like, that's the gig. And at that time, it was a very competitive thing to be able to get to a place where you can make a living at it, where basically where you're working every day. And honestly, Dianne kind of she worked in an office and supported us as I tried to make my way into the session world. And I finally did. I got to a place where I could pay the bills with it, and did that there was about a 5-year period there of doing that.
I had no
that
idea.
led to some songwriting and some independent production, like bands who, needed songs and needed a producer. I could help them out. You'll probably appreciate this. This was the early days of digital recording. So we're in about, this would be 86, 87 in Oberheim. You remember Oberheim?
Oh, yeah.
Came out with DSX, DMX, and the, what was the
program
keyboard?
the OBX.
OBX,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I had access to one of those systems and was learning how to do one-man band demos for people. So doing some of that, and some of that work, that production work, made its way to a guy named Neil Joseph. Do you know Neil?
I don't know Neil.
Neil was running Word Records at the time. I had done some session work for Neil as a producer, so we kind of knew each other. He took me to breakfast, and he finally got to the thing of, well, hey, I'm going to need to hire an A&R guy, and I think you'd be good at it. Well, You don't want to be so uncool as to say, well, what is that? But I had no idea. There's no Google. I had to call somebody after that breakfast and hey, well, what is A&R? Neil Joseph thinks I'd be good at it. And the guy was one of the guys who did have a lot of influence on me growing up, a guy named Bob McKenzie, that some of your listeners might know. He was an A&R guy for Benson way back. We're talking about the 80s, but instrumental in Christian music advancing stylistically some away from the folky beginnings of the Jesus movement into more pop sounding production. And Bob McKenzie was a big part of that. He also was the guy who gave me my first shot. He gave me my first session. We played down the track, recorded it. Now we're all in the control room. I'm kind of standing back here in a corner, and we're listening down to the track. And Bob kind of makes his way over to me. He's like, in a lower voice, like, hey, John, I'm not paying you by the note.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. That's funny.
Which is, certainly was a great lesson for playing, but also just a good life lesson, right? Like, most of the magic happens in the spaces, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Less is more. You may not know this about me. I was an A&R guy here for 3 years or 4 years.
For who?
For David. The Small Bones had started a label. I didn't know that. Not knowing what A&R is. When he said be an A&R guy, I mean, the internet existed just when he asked that.
You had that advantage.
And I Googled it. But here's the thing. The first act I was working with, we got into this tense moment one day, and they go, why are you trying to tell us what to play? And I'm like, I'm A&R. That's what A&R people do. And he goes, no, you're artist relations. A&R stands for artist relations.
Oh,
and I was like, and then I explained to them artist and repertoire. And and I could see this, the light bulb go off, and all their expressions changed. And they're like, yeah, that's why you're trying to tell us what songs to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Anyway.
It is artist relations.
It is that. That's a part of it. It is, for sure. Yeah.
Our daughter had been born, our first child. This is now like 87. I didn't know. Am I going to be bass playing when I'm 40? Probably not. Am I going to be a producer? Where is all this going to lead? It just seemed like all the streams came together in a confluence of, this is God's next thing for you. That was in 87. I started at Word, and I was there for 8 years. Neil was awesome in helping me, even talking about before I started the job, like, this is going to be a life transition for you, because I'd never had a real job. I'd only played music my entire life up to that point.
And it's corporate.
It was owned by ABC at that time. And you're going into an office environment where there's memos and protocol and appropriateness and water cooler gossip and all this stuff. I remember maybe I'd been there 3 or 4 months, and a guy I had worked for a lot as a player had called and like, hey, could you come by just real quick this afternoon and lay down apart for this one thing, 2 hours maybe. So I went to Neil and was like, hey, could I go a little early today? This guy wants me to come by and do a little overdub. And Neil was like, you know what? That's not who you are anymore.
Oh, wow.
Which was kind of like, ugh. I felt a little like, I wasn't trying to get away with anything, but it was some loving correction, that I needed at the time. So, and wisdom, I think, from Neil. I inherited a roster of about 21 or 2 artists that some of them I never heard of. They were signed to Word. Word had a label called Word that was inspirational music. So Sandi Patty was the biggest artist on that label. Of course, I had nothing to do with her. But a lot of artists sort of in that, it was like church music before there was worship music, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Songs that people would sing as the special music before the sermon, right? Those kinds of songs. Not really music I would listen to for my own enjoyment of music. Not really anyone that I would have signed myself, but that I needed to help them get their records made was so good for me. And Neil was like, here's your job. Here's what you need to do. We need to get 20 records that year. And you need to find them producers and get songs and make them happy with their recording.
That's amazing. So 20 records. That's a lot.
Indeed. And a lot of them happening all the same time. It was great training, even though there were a few times during the year I thought, okay, he was wrong. I'm not good at it.
Yeah.
He also had a thing about, why don't you get your feet wet and let's wait a year before you try to sign anything yourself. Of course we did. The next year I signed a girl named Cindy Morgan. Have you ever, you know Cindy?
Yeah, phenomenal.
So that was my first real signing, and it went well. You found out pretty quickly, like, wow, this A&R thing, if you sign anything that does well, you're going in the Hall of Fame all of a sudden.
Yeah, right.
And you got friends you never knew you had before, people calling, hey, let's go to lunch. And like, I've never met you, have I? That was an interesting transition to go through, but that 8 years at Word was great. Their biggest competitor was a label called Sparrow, which is now Capitol CMG, owned by Universal. It was owned by EMI at the time, but they began to court me maybe a year before I made any decision to leave. I just felt like I'd always be a Word guy. 8 years there, it had gone well. I was a loyal guy. There were a lot of things attractive to going over to Sparrow, but I just didn't feel like I could do it. And it would take too long to go into all the spiritual things that were going on in me at the time and spiritual growth, trying to hear the voice of the Lord and where is he taking me right now. I learned a lot during that year, but eventually did make the swap and went over. Sparrow was run at that time by a guy named Bill Hearn. His dad, Billy Ray Hearn, who had started Sparrow, was retiring. Bill was moving up into his role, and Peter York, who had been running A&R, was moving up into president. So I was going over to run their A&R department. It was a fantastic choice. I don't know that my career was better or worse because I made the move, but certainly getting to work with some different people, and I really loved the Hearns and Peter and was grateful to get to learn from those guys.
You had that first year where you're doing things that you inherited. Do you have any memories of your first moments where you picked everything? You picked the producer, you picked the songs, you picked everything, and it was on you, and what that was like.
Yeah. That's funny. I don't know that I do, because so much of what you're doing is to make sure they own it. The artist owns it. You're bringing these ideas to them. But if it's not them, if they're like, no, I don't like that guy, or I don't like this song, or whatever it's saying, you got to move on. It's got to be their record. They're going to live with it the rest of their lives, and you're going to move on to something else, right?
Did you have any like blowouts or like things that didn't work out?
What comes to mind when you ask that question? Do you remember an artist named Scott Wesley Brown?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And Scott had a good run. He was maybe crested over his peak by the time I started working with him at Word, but still popular and still doing well. Very missions minded. He had a ministry called Musicianaries, where he would collect instruments that people would donate and take them over to other countries and help give them away to, African kids. And I just respected that so much. But Scott had turned in a song, and honestly, I don't remember the hook of it or the idea, but the second line of the first verse said, the blood of bulls and goats. And I'm like, Scott, the blood of bulls and goats, is that a line you want to have in a song? And man, he defended it to the hilt. And my position was like, I just don't know that people really identify with that, passage about sacrifices in the Old Testament. We sort of got a little sideways on that. And then it sort of set the table for another song he had called When the Whole World Knows. And the whole first verse is he's getting his clothes packed. He's getting everything ready. He puts his guitar in his case, carrying it out the front door. He's about to go on the road. His little girl comes to the door and says, Daddy, when will you be back? And that sets up the chorus. The first line of the chorus is, when the whole world knows. I'm like, Scott, first of all, are you going to stay gone until the whole world knows? That's what you're saying in this song.
Yeah.
So I remember arguing the most with him about songs like that, but also feeling pretty unqualified. Like he'd done it much longer than I was. I was I was in my first year of doing the job. And probably like you're faking it a good bit. I didn't even go to college. I had no experience in any of this like contract negotiation and business stuff. But at that time, the A&R people were responsible for at least getting the agreement ready to go to the attorney. You're completely faking all this. I'm trying to read books on music business and all that. Neil would give me a few tips. But I remember being in a room with an artist named Buddy Green. You remember Buddy?
I don't know.
He's big. He's a session harmonica player here in town now and was big in the whole Gaither circuit for a long time. And his manager was in the room and we're talking about this agreement. And the manager looks at Buddy and goes, Buddy, John is being very shrewd here. And I'm like, I am? I'm thinking.
That's hilarious.
I'm completely faking it.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think God just gives you grace to manage your way out of those things.
I do think, because I have a similar thing where I didn't know anything about royalties and shares and publishing, who owns what.
Yeah.
I got put into the lion's den with certain information that would make it work great for the label. But I remember getting shouted at by the people on the other side of the table, like, how dare you? And I'm like,
yep.
That's what I was told to say. And it was like I was the lamb in the lion's den, innocently thinking that this was...
You carry the message in
Yeah, I carried the messages.
But it wasn't your message.
But it wasn't my message. Yeah. And, and I got quickly told.
Are you an Enneagram guy at all?
I mean, a little bit.
I'm not really, but I've done the assessment. And I'm a 9, which is the peacemaker. And it was interesting to find out there are 4 of us in A&R at Centricity. We're all 9s. When I read about the qualities of a 9, it resonated a little bit because 9s supposedly see both sides of things. They want to see sides come together. And I felt like it's been all these years of doing this job where I feel like I have been explaining the business side to creatives and the creative side to business people for 40 years now. And that's probably some wiring, that is required to be able to do that with any sort of success, because those things don't go together very well. And you are going to feel like the enemy to one side or the other unless you develop some skill for bringing the things together.
When people ask me about the Enneagram, I say I'm the one that can't remember any details. So I don't know any.
Dianne says I'm the number that whatever number doesn't care about the Enneagram. That's the number
exactly.
I am. Yeah. I can't get her to get interested at all in it.
It's fascinating, but I have no memory for it. So it's just...
I would probably be the same way, but that sort of stuck when I read that assessment and then realized that all 4 of us were the same thing. I thought, well, maybe there's something there to at least pay attention to, right?
So, that guy that hired you, he read that in you.
Maybe so. Maybe that was something when he said, I think you'd be good at it. I'm sure there was some relational thing he saw in there, but I do think it was very helpful. Some of those people that I inherited when I went to Word, I had played on their records. To them, I was known as a little bass player, but to have had that experience... Like, no, I'm one of you. I'm a creative just like you. I've come up hungry and looking for a break, just like you. I think that did help.
So you moved on to Sparrow.
When I was at Sparrow, they bought another label called Star Song, which one of your former guests,
Yes.
Jackie, had worked there. They put me over Star Song to run that. And it was a really successful time, a lot of blessing and favor during that time of the different artists that we got to work with. When I moved to Nashville, the band that hired me recorded for Benson Records. And Benson was the label at that time. We're talking about late 70s, all through the 80s. Everybody that was anybody was on Benson. It was a historic, very progressive Christian music label. It started as a publishing company. It was 80-something years old if you went back to the original family that founded it. And the last guy to run Benson was a guy named Bob Benson, the last family guy before they sold it. And here I was, a 19-year-old bass player for this band that was signed to his label. But at 19, and just my own wiring, one of my regrets is that I didn't go up to Bob Benson at some point and go, hey, could I go to coffee with you every month or something? Like, I don't even know if I would have known the word mentor at that time. I just knew, man, if you could hang out with that guy a little bit. There was something, Ainsley, so integrated about what I observed about him. I grew up maybe like you, of just everything's in its own box, right? Your faith's in a box, your work's in a box, your family's in a, they're all different boxes. And he was just so integrated and seemed to flow through all those things so well and beautifully. He would come out on the bus with us, and here's your record company president leading you in communion in the lounge of the bus, a guy in a suit. Just a profound effect on me. Now, Benson had gotten sold. Bob passed away. It had been bought and sold several times. People way smarter than me had been hired to come in there and try to resurrect it. The guy before me, much better at trying than I would have been. But I got this call, hey, would you come be president of Benson?
Wow.
And Ainsley, it was like, oh, of course, this is my full circle 360 destiny. That's why God brought me to town, is to bring Benson back to its former glory, because I knew Bob and I knew the sort of culture he built. I left the great job I had and went to take on this project.
How many years were you at EMI?
Just a little over 3. And I left to go run Benson. It was the worst time of my career.
Is that right?
You know, I would sit here now and say to you, I do think God wanted me to go there, but it wasn't for the reasons that I wanted to go there.
Right.
He had some things to teach me that would come back to me later in my career, but it was a real crucible. I'll tell you this. I was standing at the sink one morning, brushing my teeth, and Diane's like, you got some blood right there. And I opened my mouth, and my mouth's got blood all in it. She's like, you're going to the dentist. And this was in the thick of these Benson days that were the most stressful. The company that owned Benson was very financial forward. Like, here's your numbers for this quarter and you've got to meet it. And, you know, and that's just a corporate thing.
Yeah.
A few hours later, I'm in a dentist chair and he's, looking in my mouth. And these are the words that came out of his mouth. Are you under a lot of stress?
Wow.
And I'm like, I don't know, I guess normal. And he said, well, I've seen this before. Like, your tongue is chewed up. You're chewing your tongue at night. Generally, that's an indicator of a lot of stress that people are in. That's how bad that little season got. I had heard Andy Stanley say one time that every great vision starts with a broken heart. I had no clue what that meant when I heard him, but I thought that was an interesting statement. What we're talking about right here, 13, 14 years of this career under different corporations. And these corporations that own these Christian music labels, of course they don't think about ministry or care about it. They care about their stockholders being happy, right? And getting a return on their investment. There's no shame in that. Good for them, right?
Yep.
And you and I both know a lot of really good men and women that work in those systems. Yeah. It's the system. It's not the people, right? And they're doing their best to glorify God with the work they do in those systems. Yeah. And thank God they're there. But for me, when I heard Andy say that, every great vision starts with a broken heart. After the dentist visit, Dianne is like, you're not going to the office, And we were walking downtown Franklin. I'm like, Dianne, wouldn't it be amazing just to have some sort of small little label with a few artists that you didn't have all this pressure to have to make this number every quarter. And it could lean a little more toward ministry and art making away from the corporate pressure, even a little bit. Wouldn't that be amazing? And Ainsley, that's what God did in bringing about Centricity. So the broken heart of trying to work with artists in a system that can be in opposition to ministry and even art making broke me down to a place that I was able to then give birth to this other idea of starting a label that was exactly what I talked to Dianne about walking. That he gave that to me with some people who were very generous in funding it. I didn't know it at the time. In some ways, I felt like, well, I really earned that, as much as any of us ever earn anything. Those 13, 14 years of that corporate work kind of set me up for the resurrection of what I felt like was it, because Benson got closed down. And I know some of your other guests have talked about when Napster came along and the music business began to devolve, and it was file sharing was sort of the beginning of the end of the music business as we had known it. And like classic good old corporate music biz, nobody went to Sean Fanning at Napster and goes, that's a pretty good idea. Somebody can just download a song on their computer and like, how can we partner with you? No, we start suing people and trying to put them out of business, which did happen for years, but eventually they're going to win because it is a good idea. That whole, decade between file sharing starting up and us finally getting to iTunes, some way to monetize people's desire to do that was a wasteland for the music industry. And Benson was one of the victims of that. I'm sure you felt it when it was happening. That's what led to the birthing of Centricity, which is an independent label, family owned. Obviously, we have to do good business. Any organization does.
Benson's 2001 finishes.
Yeah.
But I thought Centricity was like 2005. Like there's an intervening period. What happened in there?
It was closed in 2001.
Were you there till the close?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm so
First
sorry.
Time. Yeah, thank you.
That's a brutal, it's a brutal way.
First time that had ever happened to me, where you get called up to the boardroom and, you sit at the long boardroom table where the CEO tells you, the decision has been made. And I think there were about 20 people on staff at that time. And you realize this is one thing for me to lose a job. That never happened to me before. But to feel responsible for 20 other people and their families, it was a burden that I did not do well trying to carry. But again, God was at work through all of that, right? Those things that you're like, I don't ever want to do that again, but thank you for doing that and continuing this good work that you started in me years ago. Some of it I don't like the way the growth happens, but thank you for being committed to it. In a prayer, you're saying those kinds of things, even though you don't know what's next. Anyway, I had done some work with a producer up in Seattle, a guy named Scott, and Scott called to make all this worse, the news of Benson closing this historic label. And you remember the days where we had our own publications and we had the CCM Update and Billboard and all that stuff. It was very public. And, everybody knew that Benson had been struggling for years. But to be the guy that shut it down.
You're at the helm as the ship sank.
Yeah, it just was devastating, and everybody wanted to do interviews and like, I don't want to talk about this publicly, but you felt like you sort of needed to. So it was tough. So people knew about it. When Scott called, he's like, well, what are you going to do? And I have no idea, Scott. I, as far as I know, with what's happening in the music industry, there's not going to be another job. Like people are getting laid off all over the place, and maybe I'm done with music. Maybe this is the end of that road for me. So he begins to tell me about this family up in Seattle that had funded a recording for a worship leader up there that he had produced. He's like, I'd love to send you this. You give it a listen and give us some feedback on what you think we could do with this. You know this from doing the job. I've never really been involved in marketing or distribution or that side of any label work. You're just working on the signing and the getting the music made, So I'm like, you tell him that, like, I don't know that I could be a good counsel for you on how to market this thing, but I'm happy to listen to it. So this family, they were successful entrepreneurs. They had, some means to invest in things, and that's sort of what they were doing at the time. And they brought up this idea, well, would John want to start a label? All this communication was happening through this guy, Scott. And I'm telling Scott, here's what's going on in the music biz right now. And it's not just Nashville, it's LA, New York. Things are melting down and nobody knows where it's going. I think he would tell that to them and then he'd come back around. But eventually they put me on a retainer as like a consultant to help them find maybe some artists. They wanted to do some more of that. They felt like they had blessed this girl, Jamie, and they liked the process of it, and they felt like that was maybe something.
Jamie
Jamgosian. They were sort of wondering, well, Lord, is this a stream that you're wanting us to get in, and could we do this with other artists? And so that sort of filled that gap. And come to find out, several labels who had laid off so many staff needed people that they could hire like on contract basis. So ironically, I worked for Word on a couple of projects and some startup labels that just put food on the table there for a while. But this Seattle family never stopped talking about, we want to start a label, and me saying it's not a good time. And you remember this, there's so many sort of wealthy people that would come to town and start labels, and there was a lot of hubbub. They would hire people and sign artists, and then it would just go away, right? Remember those?
Oh, yeah. It's far more glamorous in theory.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And than the reality.
There's
the
a
reality
romance
is not
about
there.
it.
Yeah.
But all these people would figure out, oh, we're going to lose a lot of money, and they would leave and just leave a lot of damaged people in the wake. None of these were good stories, and I would tell them those stories. But entrepreneurs are this way. They were eventually like, we're going to do this. And if you can sort of be our Nashville guy, great. And if you can't, would you help us find somebody? And I'll have to say, thank God for these wives, right? Dianne was the one saying, I feel like you should take this more seriously and you should be talking to them more. So I feel like she had a good sense of maybe what it could become more than I did. I probably had too much shame from all that had happened with Benson. And the last thing I want is some announcement that John Mays is starting a label or something like that. Partly because of that, and partly because of the way this family operates. It was a very quiet beginning. I didn't know if we'd go a year. And at the end of that year, it was like, well, we certainly won't go another year, and we'd go another year. And they were just very patient. They were in it, and this is one of the things I love about them. They weren't in it just to see a return on their investment. They did not see a return on their investment for a handful of years. But they loved the joy of blessing young independent artists. And the ones that I was being able to find for them were just good fits for that. At some point, it became a real thing. Let's call this something. And that's what became Centricity. But because we didn't really get our distribution and everything lined up until 2006, that's what we call our beginning. Even though we were doing some recording and releasing music before that, I think when we got distribution, we felt official, right?
Right.
And for
you
sure,
got distribution just in time for CDs to go away.
Right. What genius timing.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And listen, there were other labels starting around that time that didn't make it. Why God gave us this grace, I don't know, but I'm just grateful for it. And now that's been, 20-something years, that we've been able to be around and build a label on a culture that was born out of that broken heart from all those years in corporate label work, that who knew if it would work or not. With the changes in the industry and the Lumry's support, this family's support, it worked.
Amazing.
Yeah.
In the process of the label going from Jamie to what it is now, I'm interested in the milestones. There was a point at which it turned a profit. I'm curious about how that whole arc When?
Well, I will tell you, it was before Lauren.
Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm proud of that as much as any sort of healthy pride. I'm glad that that happened. We didn't, I don't think, have this identity, but we did begin to sign some things that other labels were dropping, and that I just had affinity for them, for their work. I felt like maybe they didn't get the shot they needed at corporate labels, you know. One of those was a guy named Aaron Schust.
Yeah.
That was our first #1 song, way before Lauren.
What was that song?
Didn't you mix it?
My Hope
Is in You.
I did. I mixed that song.
Yeah, that's you. So you mixed
So he was on Centricity by that point. Okay. I didn't even make that connection.
He had not been on a major label. He had been on another indie for his big song, My Savior, My God.
Yes.
That wasn't us. But our first #1 and another big song for him, My Hope Is in You, was our first #1. And thank you.
Oh, no. I'm so blessed to be on it.
Another guy named Johnny Diaz.
Oh, yeah.
Just one of the first 3 bands we signed and distributed was a band called Down Here.
Oh, yeah.
And Down Here, in a classic music biz story, won a Dove Award like on a Thursday night for best pop album or something, and got dropped the next day.
Oh, yeah, that's
and
beautiful.
we can laugh about this now because that was a completely different regime at Word at that time, but they got dropped, and I just thought they were so good. And we had a great 3 or 4 album run with those guys.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we had some strategy, let's sign people that are being dropped from major labels, but we did do some of that and had success with it. Those 3 particularly that come to mind. In fact, we have a song from Down Here, a Christmas song called How Many Kings, that is just evergreen. It pops up every Christmas as one of our high streaming songs. Again, another great thing about streaming, you know, that can happen. I would not ever be smart enough to say that was our strategy, but it did work some for us. A lot of the groundwork had been done with these artists already, and their names were sort of known already. All we needed to do was get good songs for them and put out good sounding music on them. It worked in a lot of those cases. Johnny Diaz had a huge song. I think is his biggest song he's ever had.
What was that one?
It's called Breathe. Side note on that song, that is a good music biz story. We were at the place on the record of, we just don't have the single. And you know, that happens all the time. We've got the songs that have the heart tug. We've got the songs that are like the artist just has to say this, but we don't have the radio song or songs. We were working on those. He had written with Tony Wood, and I can't remember the third writer in the room, but sent me the song. It's called Breathe. And it's all about being still, listening. As you well know, like most radio songs, they have a formula. The chorus is going to explode and get big and be real hooky and memorable, and you want to sing along with it. Well, this did the opposite. Like, here goes the verse, and the chorus goes to breathe.
It's a breakdown.
Just breathe, and it's just piano vocal. And so I respond like, this is a good song, even good for our market, like all these women that listen to and they're busy with raising their kids. Like, this is probably a good song to release, but clearly not a single. That was my quote. But we went with it. We had tried another song as a single. The album came out, and Chris, our head of radio, one day was like, I think we're going to go with this Breathe song. And like, well, why are we doing that? You know? But Dianne, again, had been talking to us and like, I love that Breathe song. Like, that speaks to me and in my life. Now, 4 or 5 months later, we're at a staff meeting. Chris is going, you guys, the numbers on this Breathe song, like the reports we're getting back, it was looking like it was going to be a hit. So I go back to the email where the thread where they had turned in the song, and I'm like, hey guys, there's some great stuff going on with the song. I just wanted to let you know, like, this is exciting. And clearly the reason for it, sheer A&R genius. So I sent it, and Johnny, who can be a little bit of a slow responder, in 2 seconds sent back my original, clearly not a single. And I'm like, Johnny, stay on topic. Clear A&R genius.
Had you remembered you'd said that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you knew.
Yeah. That's why I was making the joke about A&R. But to this day, Johnny calls me genius because of that.
Yeah, it's great. It's funny how non-formulaic things are sometimes the breakthrough. I remember Laura Story Blessings. You know,
you're so
I'm
right.
like, how is that song, like 13 weeks or whatever at number one?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just a piano and a vocal and maybe a
Gigantic.
pad.
But something in that song connects.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Ainsley, like I've been doing it a long time. So have you. I don't know that I can ever name what that thing is. And maybe that is.
I don't think there is a thing. It's a moment in time.
Yeah.
It's what everybody's feeling and they relate to.
But you cannot make it happen. You can try. Even like songs that you get, like I really feel the weight of that emotion when I'm listening to it. You release it, nothing happens. But you and I both have plenty of the stories of the thing you think, this is undeniable. This will be a big hit. I know it. And it goes nowhere. And then these songs like Breathe that you don't think will do anything and they end up being hits.
Matt Redman's 10,000 Reasons, which I did work on.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that was a last minute addition. First time I heard that on my console, I was like,
There
this
it
could
is.
do really good.
So you were right about that one.
Well, my wife actually, she's listening down the line.
There
She
it
goes,
is.
That's a good song.
We sang that at church Sunday. You know, in terms of the progress, there were those kinds of artists with a big song here and there. Down here, it ended up being a good signing for us. I've left out the whole story of Centricity was sort of birthed out of a retreat. The Lumrys, this family, have a studio up in Washington. We ended up deciding to host a retreat. Now, this was before there was a Centricity, and just invite some independent artists up and pour into them and co-write some. And we really didn't have it that thought through, but I knew a handful of indie artists that maybe would benefit from something like that. So to this day, we still do these retreats. And along the way, we got better at them, I think, and figured out, wow, like what label gets to do this? Invite people you're interested in their music, but you don't know them, they don't know you, and let's hang out for a week together and talk about music and songs and creativity and industry stuff and build a friendship and see what God might do with that. Let's start there. 2010 or so, I feel like we sort of realigned that retreat into more of an A&R tool for us. And let's invite people who at least were interested in what they're doing musically, you know. And so Lauren was one of those. I think she was at our 2012 retreat. And it's a fun story because Lauren had really never played a gig or written a song or anything. She was on a feature for a band called The Assembly. I had their CD. She would occasionally lead worship with them, and they asked her to feature on a song on this CD. And so they were at the retreat. That was really the main invite, but we needed another girl. I asked him about, who's this girl on this second verse of this track? And they told me about Lauren, and, you know, you end up talking to her folks, and she was still pretty young. But she comes to the retreat. There is a time during each retreat where everybody gets up and does a song or two, because really the A&R team sort of knows who's up there and how they sound, but the rest of the team doesn't. A lot of the writers that are up there don't know. So it's just a chance for everybody to hear everybody. Well, the night before we're doing that, the lead singer from the Assembly, this band, his appendix ruptures.
Oh,
And he's off to the hospital and he's out for the rest of the retreat. Those guys the next day, and as much as you say, hey, this isn't a label showcase, don't carry that pressure with you. As much as you say that, you
can't help it.
We're up there playing and there's a label sitting out there.
Yeah.
You know, so the rest of the guys are like, oh, fine. You know, we're up here at this retreat and we don't have a lead singer. Could Lauren sing? Could y'all just do some worship songs and let her kind of lead? And I guess, you know, they weren't happy about it. But that's really the first time we heard Lauren really sing. And of course, that's when everybody's jaws dropped, you know, just a really unique and special voice. So that was the beginning of our journey with her. And she ended up moving to town, and we spent a couple of years doing development stuff and a lot of co-writing. And she waited tables at Chewy's for much of that and worked hard doing that job and writing when she could. So eventually the song showed up, the How Can It Be song, and it was special. She was special, and every label prays for one of those, right? And God was very kind to give us ours.
I heard a story.
Okay.
And I think it's one of your ex-employees. And I can't attribute the name because I simply cannot remember it at this point in my life. But he was talking about, she calls him and says, hey, listen, I feel like I should be a nanny for a family in Atlanta or something. They've asked me to come and be the nanny. Maybe I'll do that instead of the music.
Yeah, she did it.
She did the nanny?
She left here to go down there and spend about a year down there. But she was also, it was a family associated with North Point Church, who we were also working with a little bit. The worship team and people from North Point were pouring into her a lot during that time too. So it wasn't without its value for her and her growth. And I was happy about that,
Yeah.
But yeah, it was all like, do what now? When she first, but can be that way. She's just, she lives life pretty freely. And,
for people who've it's their whole, everything they've ever done is to write those songs and get the deal. And I think I'll be a nanny. It's like, what?
Yeah. She was going to continue writing down there, but it wasn't rights that we could set up for her, anything like that.
Right. I think it spoke a little bit to who she was. I think, in a good way. It's like music isn't my God.
Hopefully, in this system that we've been able to sort of set up, and it doesn't always work this way, but when we get to spend a week with those people at this retreat in a very low-key environment, it's in a little bitty town, there's nothing else to do. You eat all your meals together, you hang out with each other for a week. The people who music is their God, it shows up pretty fast,
Yeah.
Or other motives or cultural misfits, right? People that you realize, I'm so glad they came to the retreat because we wouldn't work with that person and they wouldn't work with us. It's just not a fit.
Yeah.
Because of that, and hopefully good discernment when it comes time to make those decisions.
Yeah, that's good.
I don't think we would have ever been down the road that far with her if music was her God.
I appreciate that because whenever I'd see these social media posts about these retreats, I'm like, you're really explaining the value of it in a much bigger way. I love it. It's great.
You need to dig into Jacob Collier. He's amazing. Not a Christian artist, but there's a YouTube documentary on him called The Room Where It Happens, because the room where it happens is his bedroom at his mom's house. At 13 and 14, he was doing work that was, we were talking about prodigies earlier. He genuinely is a musical genius prodigy, and he's in his early 20s now. They're interviewing his mom because Jacob is 16 now. Quincy Jones' office calls and says, hey, we would like to manage Jacob. She's clueless. She's a violinist, and she's telling the interviewer, I didn't know who Quincy Jones was. I didn't know does Jacob need a manager? What does a manager do? And so the guy goes, well, so what did you tell him? And she said, well, I just said, could we start by being friends first? Which was so sweet, I thought, especially to Quincy Jones, right? That she didn't know who Quincy was.
That's great.
Was so great.
That's fabulous.
That's the essence of our retreat. And in fact, I played that clip a few retreats back. And now anybody we invite, we tell them, really, this is our goal, is just to begin a friendship with you. And we don't know what God will do with that. I will say our best signings have come out of those retreats. And we're awfully grateful and blessed to be able to do them.
It's one of the lessons I learned early on. The developing of a relationship and a friendship trumps almost everything else.
Surely it's going to be in every episode you do, right?
Yeah.
Because it's too true not to show up in every conversation. You're old enough to know now, I think one of the gifts of aging is the longer over-the-shoulder look that you get when you look at your history and you see these dots that God connected, just relationships, and how one led to that and that led to that. You had nothing to do with it. It was just God orchestrating these things. The longer that line is, it makes you so grateful for the way he's worked. And it's all been through relationship.
The further away you get from the crash, the more it makes sense. You stress less if another trial comes along.
And everybody has their crashes, but that career crash for me, which was also very personal, Jason Gray, he's our veteran artist now. He was signed in 2008. I've worked longer with Jason than any other artist ever, and he's such a dear friend. He was telling me that his counselor told him one time, never trust someone who hasn't been broken.
I think that's beautiful? Very good.
Yeah. And there have been other times, but certainly that was a breaking, that Benson time for me.
If you haven't had a fail, you haven't tried enough things yet.
Who can really put trust in someone who's never failed? Right. That's not
they
human.
They haven't found their limits. Finding your limit is making a fail. It's
That's
like,
right.
okay.
That's right.
One thing I do notice, talking about limits, I'm surprised in some ways, but now I hear your story, I'm not surprised that you're not the president of Centricity.
No, yeah.
Like, that could be your role. You had Steve Ford there. He was the manager. And yet you were like the heart and the start.
This family, the Seattle family, has had a lady that works with them. Her name is Karen. She has worked years before there was Centricity. She had worked with them just overseeing all their stuff, their investments and companies and all this stuff. So it just naturally flowed that, oh, they're starting a new company, this label down in Nashville, and Karen's going to be the overseer of that. So that's who I've always reported to.
Oh,
But
okay.
we were just working out of my house for the first 3 or 4 years, and it was very much a one-man band, except for what Dianne was helping me do. But what was becoming glaring is I have no idea how to market anything. You're outsourcing people like for radio and all these different marketing things. And Steve and I had been dear friends for years, had never worked together, but had been ships passing in the nights as one would go from one label to another. And so he was very generous to come over and run marketing for us. So then there's the getting the music done and signing the artists, and there's the telling of those stories and getting it out to people. And Steve was so good at that. At some point, it became clear as we grew, somebody's got to be better at business, at this. And Steve had been general manager at Pop, had a lot more experience than that. My experience with that was Benson, which was not a good story. And it helped me really flourish in my gifting and him and his. It was the two of us for a long time, and just literally driving to radio stations and taking singles in, playing our songs in front of people so that we know that they at least heard them. Because you just send them, it's in a stack somewhere. We did many years of that and building relationships, just like we're talking about, People knew me and Steve because we'd been around a long time, but they didn't know what Centricity was, and they certainly didn't know most of these artists. I was very grateful that Steve was able to come along and bring his expertise.
I was always impressed. He always thought out of the box. Well, we should try this. We should try this. The radio station driving tour was, I don't know if that was his original idea.
Well, I think originally it was Barry Gordy's idea.
Oh,
he
right.
did that at Motown.
Absolutely. I'm sure.
Maybe that's where we got it. But again, we knew some of these guys, but to send songs to them and hope that they would listen to it, we developed a pretty good system of get to the station. We were in a rental car. We've already dialed in the sound system in the car, because I don't know if you've had this experience, but radio people are notorious for playing something at 12 dB. I don't know how in the world they even hear it, but we want to crank it a little bit, right? When we were playing our songs. So we would get them out in the car. We'd go to lunch. They're in the car. Now we can play the song.
Oh, I love that.
And learn from them. Why would you not add this song? And we learned a lot from all those visits.
I remember going to an office in Australia before I moved, in the 80s. I think it was a Christian radio station, not that we have that many, but, part of my question was, how do we get played on radio? I didn't know anything. And he just points his finger across the room, and there is a window shelf. There's got to have been 500 CDs on there.
It's so defeating, isn't it?
Right. And he said, well, when I get something in the mail, that's where it goes. It occurred to me at that point, there's another way to break through. The relationship's going to...
Yeah.
Because if I call my friend, say, dude, you've got to listen to this. It puts an emotional pressure.
You bet.
You're going to use a little bit of your friendship capital to get that.
But that guy with the CDs in the windowsill, I bet he would even say there may be a hit in there.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just not the ratio of my time that I have available to dig through all that is so low, I'm never going to find it. So
Absolutely.
he's not going to invest time digging through a stack like that.
I do have respect for people that do that digging, because when I was doing the A&R and I had stacks of CDs to listen through.
It all starts to run together.
It all runs together.
Yeah.
You're supposed to feel and sense what the public might relate to.
There's the old thing of if you don't love it, no one else will. I don't even know if that's true, though. I mean, there's stuff that I don't love that ends up being huge hits, and vice versa. The thing that makes something a hit or a super popular song, I feel like in worship you can describe it a little bit, because it's the song that makes people want to sing it in church, right? That brings people into that chorus, and they get emotionally involved in it, and it gives them a voice to say what they want to say to God at that time. But more CCM kinds of songs, I'm 40 years in, I have no idea what works and what doesn't. And it's always changing. The best I can do is generalities. Generally, these kinds of things work in a song, and we probably need some of these kinds of songs on your project. If the artist cares about radio at all, they'll usually, like, as long as I can make sure that it's me, I'm not sacrificing me, my voice, my style at the altar of radio, but can we take what works at radio and sort of cross it over?
Or work out what about
it.
you
Yes.
is going to be radio
and
friendly.
They still feel honest.
Yeah.
And like they haven't sold out, right? And finding that overlap is really difficult.
I've been in meetings where there's been very much like we're pushing these formulas and these production styles and all this stuff. You know, we're going to kit this person and pop them into this mold. That mold's been used. Like, we need you. You can't do that person better than they did them. You have to do you.
That's right. The guy who told me you don't get paid by the note also told me one time, there are songs that if you don't write them, will never get written.
I wonder if there's other pivotal phrases in your life.
Oh my goodness.
I bet there's a whole bunch.
Yeah.
And you'll be walking around tomorrow thinking,
should've-
man, that thing is like, that is the line. Other embarrassing stories or fails. Obviously, I mean, I completely feel for you with the Benson thing. I totally do.
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't know if I could have suffered that myself.
Yeah.
It's a rough. I don't mean to bring that up, but I think it was formative. You are who you are,
much.
and Centricity is who it is because
100%.
you had that experience.
100%. Had that not happened to me, there would not be a Centricity. As Frederick Buechner says, the magnificent defeat.
The magnificent defeat.
Right? It crushes you, but it's holy ground.
Yeah.
That something will grow from, you know. So we all have them. This is silly, but something that comes to mind. There's a big radio conference in Orlando every year called Momentum.
Yes.
Where all the radio stations gather, all the program directors and all the labels take their artists down to do their dog and pony shows. And the biggest Christian radio station that wasn't part of K-Love was KLTY in Dallas. That's a station we would visit all the time. I'm walking in the lobby, and there's a lady sitting on a bench weeping by herself in this super busy lobby of this hotel. So I walk over there. I just said, "Can I pray for you?" Then she begins to talk that she had just been let go from working at this radio station. A super emotional thing for her. She had worked there for years. She got let go before this conference and really struggled, like, well, should I go now? I don't work there anymore. But she decided to come on, and it hadn't been a great experience for her. People were finding out all this stuff. I didn't know her at all, but I felt like sort of what people would say a God moment, you know, and I was able to pray for her, and it was a sweet time. And I introduced myself, of course, and she introduced herself to me. The very next morning, I walk in one door of the lobby, she walks in another door of the lobby, and I thought, I recognize that face, and I put my hand out and I said, "Hey, I'm John Mays. Have I met you?" She said, "Yes, you prayed for me yesterday." And there's not a hole deep enough, you know, to dig. GMA used to do these indie music conferences and things, and I would give talks. And I got into a thing for a while. At the end, when you have the Q&A, like, okay, anybody has a good question, they get a prize. And I had a bag of Tootsie Roll Pops. And I was going to throw Tootsie Roll Pops to anybody that asked a question, you know. And this guy asked a question, and he's like on the 5th row or something. And I zipped it a little too hard, and it hit him in the eye.
Oh, no.
And it was bad enough, I guess, that he got up and left, like, to go take care of his eye. And I couldn't think of anything else
that's
during the rest of the time.
You didn't know what you were going to do after that. Was there any other kind of job or career you thought, oh, you know what?
I'm curious about a lot of things. I love history. I've always thought, what would I have done had I not had this path? And I feel like maybe I would have worked in a museum or given tours for something. I think that'd be fun, you know. But so far, you know, God has sustained us through this. I don't know what's next, you know. When it's time for me to not do this anymore, I won't want to just sit down. I'll figure out something to do.
So you're at over 20 years with the Centricity story?
I mean, 22 years, I think, but 87 since my first label job
in the music
and
business.
then a lifetime of playing before that. So I've really never done anything else but music, and that's kind of a rare thing to be able to say, you know.
It is.
Especially people who survived the crash in 2000 and then other crashes that have come since, even the pandemic. So many people lost their jobs, you know. God has sustained us through all those times, and I'm really grateful for it. Wow.
Thank you for coming and sharing so much. I appreciate you no end. I'm a big fan of John Mays. So
well, and me of Ainsley, and I want to support this because I think it's such a good thing you're doing here, and the sort of the width, the breadth of the people you're inviting. It covers so many different stories, and I love that. I guess if I had anything, this is on my mind because I was talking to the Lee University, brought their music biz students to the office yesterday, and this is a theme in our A&R with our A&R team that I feel like we need to keep coming back to. But I feel like it's true for everybody. It's true for you. People, of course, asking us all the time, like, how do we get signed? What do we do? How do we have a career in music and all those kinds of things? That parable of the talents in Matthew, there's so much there, you know, but it has been reborn in me over the last couple of years as I've studied a little bit. I love these three different guys. You know, this first guy, I feel like so me. He buries the talent, right? And when he brings it back to the master, it's like, I didn't want anything to happen to this, so I'm giving it back to you just like you gave it to me.
Yeah.
It's not good for that guy, right? No. But the other two guys, one was given more and one was given less. And the guy that was given less brought back less than the guy who was given more. But they both went out into the field and used it and brought more back than they were given. And to both those guys, well done. There was no differentiation between one had more and one had less, but it does specify that, right? Some people are given more natural gifting than others. Whether you're given a lot or given less, your responsibility is to do something with it. With these students yesterday, it was like maybe the question of, what have I done today with the gifts that you've given me? What am I doing today to use what he gave me? And some of these stories are what he gave me. And so today, it's been fun to be able to sit here and share that with you.
I would see this as ministry. I think you're doing it. Me doing this podcast is that. Like, 100%. I feel like part of me was bystanding a little bit. And those people, like, how do I get it? You've just got to jump into the pool. And what's the worst that can happen? Right. That's what I say to my wife. Yeah. What's the worst that can happen? You lose everything. That may be the best life lesson that ever happens if that happens anyway.
Fantastic.
All right. I'm going to shake your hand because that's my tradition.
I love it.
That's the way I do it. Thank you, John. You're awesome.
Thanks, Ainsley. Good to be here.
Wow, what a guy, hey? He's like the uncle or the mentor for Christian music. I'm so happy that John Mays came and joined me. I have a long list of names for this show that I'd really love to have on. So I hope you'll encourage me by hitting the subscribe button. Come back next week. Until then, may all the audio that passes your ears, may all the songs that fill your heart be fantastic.